Hi, everybody. Today's January 5th, 2024, and I'm honored to have with me for the second time, part deux, the amazing Scott Johnston, author of Campusland and a sage observer of the current scene. We will be talking about DEI and how possibly both of us hope to have its existence work on a slightly different anagram of its own name, perhaps die off. And Scott, tell us what you've been working on. What is your appraisal of the current campus meltdown as experienced through your lens of Campusland?
Well, it's been a gift because I and others have been harping about the ideological rot of our universities for a long time now. I mean, I've probably been at it for 20 years. And blogging about it, and ultimately writing a book about it in novel form, in the form of satire. But and for a long time, it was like screaming into the void. And yeah, you had your ideological fellow travelers who understood what was going on, but they'd sort of shrug their shoulders, like, "What are you going to do?" And they were still writing checks to the schools and still hoping their kids would get in, and so nothing was really changing. In fact, well, it was changing. It was just getting far worse every year. And the unbelievable acceleration of the George Floyd summer was almost hard to fathom how far the needle was pushed in just a few months, with the existential distraction of COVID sort of helping their game. So in a way, what's happened in the last couple of months has been an incredible gift, because now everyone sees the emperor has no clothes. Now I don't have to explain to people what DEI is. And, they hide behind slogans: CRT, SEL, DEI,
ESG.
ESG. Yeah, another one I've been finding, actually, with some success there too, actually. And they're not going to go away. They're going to probably shift very rapidly from DEI branding to SEL branding. SEL stands for social emotional learning. And it's really more of the same crap. All these acronyms are just Trojan horses for cultural Marxism. And also you'll hear the words wellness a lot. That's another Trojan horse. So be very wary when you hear SEL, social emotional learning, wellness. Community is another red flag word. Because community never includes you or me, just for the record. But anyway, it's been remarkable what's happened in the last couple of months, because, I mean, a little odd that it took dead Jewish babies to, wake up the Bill Ackmans of the world, but it did. So it started with the wealthy Jewish donors to the Harvards and Yales and Winstons. Waking up and withholding their 9-figure donations, and that gets their attention pretty quickly. And Ackman has been remarkably forceful and effective. I was actually afraid when Clark and Getty stepped down. I mean, she's still at Harvard, still making the same amount of money. I was afraid Ackman would would sort of drop the mic and say, "Okay, job done. I'm going to go back to my hedge fund." But he doesn't appear to be doing that. I think he's sticking to the game because he's legitimately woken up. He went in and did some research and got to know what DEI was really all about. And he will tell you, I mean, if you read his stuff, he didn't fully understand before all this.
Yeah, no, I appreciate your reposting his letter from January 3rd. And I've read a lot of his stuff in the interim. He's a good writer, actually. And he makes it very clear, a very clear case. I mean, I've kind of been aware of all this for a long, long time. But it's one of those things, a little bit like what happened during COVID itself, aside from George Floyd and all that, where, this kind of like the cloud inside the silver lining inside the cloud. We have the opportunity to see what's actually going on. We've had a window, a lens into what happened not just on the big college campuses, but in our middle schools and high schools and whatnot, when we had this so-called remote learning, and parents for the first time got to see a fair amount of the cultural Marxism, the kind of the gibberish that's getting put out, and it's worse than gibberish. I mean, I would almost rather have gibberish than implanted, evil thoughts. I mean, it's very much a kind of a Maoist sensibility of these cultural screams and shouting people down. And you might be aware of the terminology better than I am. But pitting everybody against each other, and if whatever your skin tone happens to be determines where you're going to be on this kind of like bully machine.
This all stems from another odious concept called critical theory, which ask 10 people what critical theory is, and you'll get 10 different answers. That assumes that 10 people you ask have any idea at all. But the binding concept, one consistent thing about critical theory is that there's no absolute truth. Truth is a social construct, and it's a construct created by those with power. So if you buy into that, you have a reason to reject all of our history, because our history was dominated. I'm talking now about American history and Western history, dominated by DWEs. There's another acronym for you: dead white males. They were the ones who had the power, and so they created the truth. And it's entirely suspect edifice that needs to be torn down. So it gives you a very shorthand way to dismiss all of our founding principles. The Enlightenment, our original documents, the Declaration, the Constitution, all these principles, and reconstruct what you want. It also gives you an excuse to take over the institutions, because then you have the power and you create truth.
Now, the interesting thing is, even if even if you're not of the lighter skin color, you might just ask yourself, okay, fine, the dead white males, but what did they produce? Just let's look at the results. A lot of people who have these sensibilities are still on their cell phones, they're still on their computers, they're driving their cars, are using electricity. Pretty much all the products of potentially still living white males. But nonetheless, and there was a thing in the Boston world right now. We have an Elizabeth Warren acolyte as mayor, Michelle Wu, and she's notable for having had a non-white Christmas party. So opposite Irving Berlin, she wanted to have a non-white Christmas and invited only elected officials of the non-white persuasion. But more recently, one said counselor would not. She did kind of the Colin Kaepernick for their swearing-in ceremony. Rather than taking a knee, she just stood hands at her side and mute during the recitation of following the Constitution of Massachusetts and United States and all kind of stuff. And clearly, and she was born in Cape Verde, and her Twitter avatar has her with Rashida Tlaib. I'm not sure where Rashida was born, but there's this sense, that it's this non whatever, they're identifying in a certain way, and it's against white, it's against everything the whites produce, and that's against the constitutional republic we have. And yet, why not stay in Cape Verde? Why not stay in Rashida's? I think she's from Jordan or Palestine, whatever Arab portion. Why not stay in Somalia for Ilhan Omar? And it's kind of like, you came here for the reason. So even if you don't like the people who started it, you are coming for the product. And just as you're staying with your smartphone, you're staying with your electricity, you're staying with your car, you're not giving up all those things. And meanwhile, and it's kind of a bite the hand that feeds one sensibility. But this is rather pervasive in campus. And I'm sorry for the diatribe, but I don't know if you have any comment on any of that kind of thing going on. It's not just colleges and whatnot. It seems to be rather pervasive. A and B. Now, what are colleges doing about any of this, if anything?
What are they doing about it? They're going to try to do very little. In fact, the empire will strike back. I mean, look what the swamp did to Donald Trump when he poked the bear. Mixed metaphor, sorry.
Yeah,
I think
there might be bears in swamps. I don't know.
you've already seen that. I assume you've seen that somebody in the last 48 hours took the time to go through all of Bill Ackman's wife's
Yeah, I
academic
saw
papers
that.
and found one instance where she allegedly plagiarized. I haven't had time to look into whether the accusation is accurate, but they better be prepared, the Ackmans, for people to be sifting through their trash.
Yeah,
They will be, their lives are going to be held up under a microscope, and if necessary, lied about. And I don't think he quite appreciates the viper's nest he's wandered into. So this is not over by any means. You have an entrenched DEI bureaucracy at all these universities, and I don't think people understand just how entrenched it is. I met a professor from Harvard recently, Carol Hooven, who wrote a book called on testosterone, the story of T, I think it's called. It sold very well, and among her sins is she actually says there are only two biological sexes.
remember, I forgot to cover my ears. I'm sorry.
And yeah, I sat next to her at dinner, and she told me the whole story. Her department at Harvard, she's no longer at Harvard. She was harassed out of the place. Her department at Harvard, like every department at Harvard, has its own DEI commissar, not just one, but like a small committee. And they monitor everything that goes on within that department. And the commissar in that department went public very quickly after Hooven appeared on Fox and made a statement to the effect that there are only two sexes, and went very public with the fact that this was hurtful and the equivalent of speech equals violence in this case, of course. And that's the level, the bureaucratic level this has reached. It's not just that there's a couple of DEI officers. I mean, the case of Yale, this example I love to cite. When I wrote Campusland, and Campusland, the villainous in the book is of course the head of DEI at a college that looks suspiciously like Yale. And I wanted to be as accurate as I could, even though it was satire. I wanted to know how many reports should this woman have in the novel. So I went on the Harvard website and I went on the Yale website, and I tried to look up how many DEI people are there. And I could not find out that information. So I started with the number 20. And I said, let's have a little fun. And this is satire, so maybe I can exaggerate a little. Let's just say that my fictional school has 30 full-time DEI professionals. So that's the number that I went with. And only when the book came out did there was a piece in the Wall Street Journal by a Yale Law School professor about the proliferation of DEI. Did I learn that there are, in fact, at least when Campusland came out, 150 full-time DEI officers at Yale. Who knows what that number is now? Because they're like HR departments. They have a way of metastasizing. So I don't think people understand how thoroughly entrenched this is, and how lots of schools force you to make DEI statements if you're applying for a job. Basically, bend the knee. How have you dedicated your life to the principles of DEI, Mr. Would-be biology professor? And you automatically get not looked at if your statement, that's the first thing they read. And if your statement isn't up to snuff, they immediately dismiss your application. So again, people don't understand just how entrenched this is. These people are angry. What's happened in the last 2 or 3 months has made them angrier, and they are not going to go away. So this is frankly, a multi-generational battle that has just been engaged by our side in a meaningful way. We've had our first very minor victory, but it truly is a minor victory in the scheme of things. I mean, Claudine Gay's scalp is is fine, and McGill from Penn, who turns out I live about 1 mile from, I didn't realize. That's fine, but the bureaucracies are still intact. Gay is, in fact, still at Harvard.
Yeah.
And so it's going to take so much more. And a lot of 9-figure checks from people like Bill Ackman not written. So anyway, this is just the beginning.
I agree. It's there's a book called there's the expression "turtles all the way down." That book is actually written about vaccines and whatnot. But I used the joke long before that. And so you get rid of one turtle, you're just going to have another one, and it's going to be self-propagating. Getting back, I wore my Yale blue tie. We're both Yale alumni, and Yale somehow has managed to slightly skirt the spotlight, at least at the Stefanik hearings. Is Yale any different in this regard versus the spotlit Penn, Harvard, MIT? I don't know if you kept up with how events transpired there, and is there going to be just kind of this factional fighting? Can we get a two-state solution on our campuses?
I'm glad you brought up Yale. Yale is no different. The happiest guy in the world right now is Peter Salovey, the president of Yale, because a couple of months before the crap hit the fan here, he announced he was retiring. So he immediately took himself out of play. And Yale is just as bad as Harvard. Everything that's happened at Harvard and Penn and MIT could easily is also happening at Yale. They're tearing down posters at Yale, and they put up. I have a friend who watched them put a Palestinian flag over a cross on the New Haven Green, right across from campus. So Yale is absolutely just as bad. In fact, historically, I would argue somewhat worse. But Salovey has dodged the bullet, and what a happy guy he must be right now. In fact, I'm told he seems like the weight of the world has been lifted off his shoulders. But interestingly, we now have Harvard and Yale looking for new presidents at exactly the same time, which I don't recall ever being the case.
Well, we're both available. Are we not both available?
We're both available. Yeah, I'll raise my hand. But people will be watching this very closely now, these searches. And I think if they want a black woman at Harvard again, I think, oh shoot, what's her name? Former secretary, she's at Stanford and former secretary of the UN. I'm just, having my middle-aged moment. She was under
Condoleezza Rice.
Condoleezza Rice. Thank you. Yes, thank you. She's probably available. I think she'd be great.
Yeah, Candace Owens, Carol Swain. It's just a funny thing. This whole diversity bit. I mean, it's always been interesting to me. You have, if you're just counting, you have uni is one and die is two. Diversity, university. Those don't necessarily go together, even though they have the diversity part in it. I mean, they could, and theoretically they should. But diversity is this very bland concept of external appearance and only one type. This kind of coloration, ethnicity thing, and never about opinion. You had your own experience on campus, did you not? Trying to speak there, and I think from what I've seen so far, you speak English pretty well. You seem rather civil. What was your experience on campus with trying to present a diversity of opinion and or just your book?
Well, I've never been asked to present my book at Yale. The book has never been reviewed by or mentioned by the Yale Alumni Magazine, which will mention obscure physics texts written by Yale alums, but not apparently a best-selling book that's actually about Yale. The Yale Co-op did carry it, so there's that. But Yale Daily News never mentioned me. Never been asked to present the book there. So there's that. I happen to be there.
Right. I kind of I apologize. I conflated two events. I'm sorry. But this was
Right.
the article I was referring to in the New York Times from 2016, Jim Sleeper, Political Correctness and Its Real Enemies. And here is Yale. So your name was in this. I guess I thought, glancing over, that you had spoken there, but no.
I have spoken at Yale in the past, but about different things. I mean, I was an adjunct professor there for 3 years. Back in the aughts. One of those college seminars, but it had nothing to do with politics.
So what was that 2016 event? And maybe you could kind of go over that and how this crystallized for you other actions.
Oh, sure. It was Screaming Girl. And to anyone listening, I would after listening, I would go on YouTube and just type in the words "Screaming Girl Yale." She was a Black undergraduate who. This was in response to a memo written by the wife of the master of Silliman College.
I remember this. This was oh God, what's
Professor Christakis' wife.
Yeah.
And she wrote just a memo to the community in Silliman College. Again, that's a residential college. Basically, it's telling everyone to chill out about Halloween costumes. If you see someone dressed as the Frito Bandito, maybe don't have a meltdown over it, and walk the other way and let people express themselves. Well, they had a meltdown over that memo, and they surrounded her husband, who was the master of the college, of course now called head of college, because you can't use the word master anymore in any context, even though it's an unrelated context. You will be shocked when you watch the video, listeners, because some very hostile students surround in a very hostile way Professor Christakis, who's very well respected and, by the way, a liberal, and start yelling vulgarities at him, telling him he should absolutely get fired. One student gets in his face and starts really going at him. And I say in his face, I mean inches away from his face. And it's extremely disquieting. But one student in particular, a girl, an undergraduate girl, just completely loses it, starts screaming at the top of her lungs, "You're a disgrace," and so on and so on. That was since it was filmed, it was a pretty widely disseminated occurrence within a day or two. And I happened to be on campus a couple days after that for a conference on the future of free speech put on by the Buckley program, which is at Yale, but has nothing officially to do with Yale, because Yale would not sponsor a conference on free speech these days. But it was on Yale's campus, and in Lindsley, Chittenden. And 200 students materialized halfway through the day. I should back up. Professor Christakis was the opening speaker at the conference, and he looked awful. And he said, "I apologize. Normally I would hang around and talk to you all, but this has been the worst week of my life, and I've had no sleep." And at the time, I did not know what had happened. It was only a couple of days, and it was a bit of a mystery. But I guess word got out that he was speaking there, and they didn't like the conference concept of free speech. 200 students materialized sort of out of thin air in the middle of the day with placards and everything. And they tried to physically end the conference. They tried to get in, but security guards were called and they were kept outside. But they were right outside the door, chanting and screaming the whole time we're in there trying to have a conference about free speech. So they're in there trying to shut down. They're trying to use their free speech to shut down ours, having skipped irony class that day. And I remember walking out through this gauntlet of screaming and spitting kids. And the anger was just palpable. I remember thinking, why hasn't anybody used all this craziness as grist for like a satiric novel, Tom Wolfe kind of effort? And that's where the idea to write Campusland first started to germinate in my head, even though I had not been a novelist.
So I love the book. I meant to have a copy in front of me, but I have 2 copies actually, and I lend one out on a periodic basis because it just comes up so often in our conversations and whatnot. People don't really have a sense of it. I said, you can read and read and read all this very dry material, but this is what you have to read. You have to read this is the campus experience, and I think it's brilliant, and I probably give way to nobody as being Tom Wolfe's bigger fan than I, but I think you really carry his mantle also as a Yaley, and it's a great work. You have potentially a TV series coming out of it, and you have another book on the way. Would you care to talk about either of those potential events?
Yeah. So Campusland has done very well, and it got as high as number 15 on Amazon, and it is being developed into a TV series. And the production company that bought the rights is pitching it to the streaming companies this month, like in the next couple of weeks. So we'll see how that goes. There it is. It was great fun to write, and I think it's great fun to read, and it does make a point, but it goes down easily. Anyway, fingers crossed that some streamer like Netflix is going to be brave enough to take this on. The concept, as I understand it, is that the book would be kind of season 1, and they are pitching a 4-season arc if it gets renewed. And the idea being it would follow the same group of students through 4 years of college, even though Campusland occurs over 1 academic year of insanity.
Yes.
And then I was, I was halfway done with a book mocking the art world, which struck me as another place that deserved mockery, as did higher ed.
I've got a good title potentially, From Our House to Bauhaus.
Okay, that sounds good. I was halfway through it and couldn't figure out how to finish it when another idea came to me. I said, I got to do this. So the art book's on the shelf, and I'll tell you what happened. So like Campusland, there was a specific event that got the idea germinating in my head. I'm on the board of a club. We'll leave it at that as far as details go. I had been doing some blogging a couple of years ago. I still blog occasionally, but I got very active blogging about the New York private school scene, and kind of the intrusion of, in particular, critical race theory into those schools as part of the DEI movement. And there's this incredibly toxic thing called, critical race theory. And someone fed me some internal documents about what was going on at Dalton, which is one of the more prominent schools in Manhattan. Mm-hmm. And a lot of very famous people went there. And it was just astonishing. It was 8 pages of demands that the faculty and administrators were making on the school, driven by George Floyd, Summer of Floyd, and some of the more activist teachers. And it was kind of astonishing stuff. It was like, get rid of AP classes because the Black students weren't qualifying for them. Half of the donations that the parents make should go to the public school system. Things like that. 8 pages of that sort of stuff. And so someone wanted to get it out there, and so they leaked it to me. So I wrote about it in a blog. The blog went berserk, and I ended up having this back and forth with with the Dalton administration because everyone at Dalton read it. In fact, I think everyone in New York read it. And the blog got 1 million hits in 6 weeks. It was kind of astonishing to watch. And the Wall Street Journal ended up asking me to write an op-ed about it, which I did. And then other people at other schools started feeding me their stuff. So one after the other, I started writing about the ideological meltdowns that these different schools were having. And they would all go viral. It was kind of a remarkable period. In one of those schools that I won't name, fast forward a few months, and the woman who was one of the things I always did in every blog piece about these schools is I would name the board members at the end of the blog. These are the people that are letting this happen. So just in case you want to know who they are. And they're all very prominent people and so forth. 2 of the schools immediately took down the names of their board members off their websites, which is very funny. And by the way, the head of school at Dalton got fired in the wake of my blogs, which was pretty satisfying. So Chris Rufo may have gotten Claudine Gay's scalp, but I got a scalp too. So anyway, fast forward a few months, a woman who was the head of the board of one of the schools that had been just atrocious in how it had handled some stuff, came up for membership at a club where I was involved with that process. And she was sailing through the meeting, and I raised my hand. I said, well, wait a minute. I don't know this woman. I haven't met her. No one's asked me to meet her, which isn't shocking. I have serious reservations about her because of the way she's handled things at this school. I think she's done an incredible disservice to the community she's supposed to serve. And that gives me some pause. And I think 2 or 3 people, almost in unison, said, oh, she's perfectly lovely. And that's the thing. No doubt she is, right? If you sat next to her at a dinner party, you'd probably say, this is a lovely person, intelligent, successful, everything else. Great dinner companion, a lovely person. And yet it's the lovely people like that that are sitting on their hands while the tenets of Western civilization are being overthrown on their watch. And so this germination turned into a novel called All the Lovely People, which happens to focus on a fictitious girls' school on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. And she'll remain nameless, but I've had some great fun writing it, and it's in the hands of my publisher, St. Martin's Press, right now.
Oh, that's lovely. Well, that's going to be a must read for me. Do you know Susan Patton? She's the Princeton mom. She's on the Upper East Side, and she wrote a book. She wrote a book about kind of, there's going to be no better opportunity for young girls than at college to meet the guy, that they will marry, and certainly don't neglect your studies. And she's a very, very bright gal, and I'm sure she did not. But I assume that's where she met her husband, and she is utterly vilified because, it's not a ultra feminist message, and she, has a rough time, ever presenting and whatnot. It's not like her thought is a revolutionary thought. It's an interesting thought, and you can either take it or leave it as you will. But it's so much, pain for people to abide by that. They won't let her speak, and they won't, and she gets all kinds of calumny thrown at her, if I'm using the word right. But a lot of these things are incredible hothouse environments. I went to, before Yale, I went to Horace Mann School in Riverdale in the Bronx. And I was, it was above our means, actually. My parents, we lived in a 1-bedroom rent-controlled apartment, and that gave us a little bit of wherewithal to do it. But there were 5 of us, my 2 brothers and I, my parents living in this tiny apartment. And so all their money kind of went to the school. And the idea was kind of in this, immigrant sensibility, to get their kids smart enough. And it actually worked. My brother and I, all three of us actually went to Ivy League schools. My younger brother never went to Horace Mann. So we don't really have a perfect experiment here. But the idea was to sacrifice that you would get this education and you'd parlay the education into a career, blah, blah, blah. You're off to the races and you're not going to be laying bricks or digging coal or whatever it is. I don't know where things got divorced, where these schools, take it upon themselves to be your new woke religion purveyors. I mean, most of the schools, frankly, did start as religious institutions, Yale and Harvard. And when I started Horace Mann, we had chapel. All those things have been, tossed. And so I guess this is kind of a philosophical question. Does there always have to be a religion as part of school? And when you get rid of the classic ones, you get these weird ones.
Absolutely. There is a great quote from G.K. Chesterton.
Yeah.
Who he said, sort of contra Marx, that it's in fact irreligion that is the opiate of the people, of the masses. And the quote is, wherever the people do not believe in something beyond the world, they will worship the world. But above all, they will worship the strongest thing in the world. And that's basically saying people are programmed genetically to need to have faith in something, to believe in something bigger than themselves. And the moment you stop believing in perfection in the afterlife, you have to believe in perfection in this life, which is, of course, a Marxist concept that you can achieve perfection. And it's we in the Western civilization who acknowledge that we're all imperfect and have to create rules like the Constitution that acknowledge our imperfections. So what you see all these now substitute religions. Climate is a substitute religion. DEI is a substitute religion. Pick your poison. There's several of them out there. And they have all the tenets of a classical religion. You can really just tick them off one by one. And they have every bit the zealotry that other religions have had in the past. And someone actually compared the colleges to the medieval Catholic Church. Not today's Catholic Church. I don't find huge fault in that, but the medieval Catholic Church with its inquisitions and its thirst for money and so forth. But so anyway, you're absolutely right. You've hit on something with this.
I was at a Yale Club event. I haven't been to too many lately. There was obviously that pandemic thing, exaggerated as it was. But I was looking over my notes because the mayor of Boston, I mentioned, is Michelle Wu. It's WU. And I was thinking, is she related to this Janet Wu, WU, who is a newscaster, ABC and whatnot. And she's a Yaley, and Michelle is a Harvard. So I thought, maybe they're related, striving, first American generation Chinese, et cetera. And anyway, but they're not, as far as I know. But Janet Wu had presented the Yale Club, and this was at the era of Tahrir Square, Egypt, the protests about the getting rid of Mubarak and putting Morsi, the Muslim Brotherhood, and whatnot. And Lara Logan, the intrepid reporter, was there, and she was, what I gather, sexually molested by multiple men, if not raped, and whatnot. And this came up somewhere in the Q&A because Janet is a reporter and Lara Logan's a reporter. They're both women, blah, 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 educated, so forth. And somebody said, and what's up with that? Some type of question, more articulately expressed. And this just kind of like, I'm almost there. It kind of blew my mind, her answer. And she's like thinking out loud. She's kind of, finger to chin, mulling. Says, well, it couldn't have been like a hate crime. And it couldn't have been racism because she's white and they're not as, they're, I don't know, Egyptians. I don't know how they consider themselves, whatever. So anyway, I saw like her putting the ping pong balls and the lottery numbers there. And so her answer was basically like, meh, like, did she deserve it? I guess, because she's a white woman there trying to, understand the other skinned sensibilities. I couldn't believe it. I sent her a note. I mean, I asked her about it at the time. And anyway, it's just kind of an amazing thing. This has been going on for some time. This is 2011, so it's 12 years ago. And she had gone to college, a couple decades before that in the 80s. Where did this start? How do we get rid of it? What are the levers we have? And have you seen this equal level of confounding stupidity?
What you just described was, also the testimony of the 3 college presidents in a nutshell. Same sort of moral confusion, because, Laura Logan, who, by the way, I believe was raped, was white and therefore a member of the oppressor class. So, different rules apply. Things can be done to her that couldn't be done if the races were reversed. So what can be done? Oh my God, that's a big question. And where did this come from? I could give you a long dissertation going back to Marx and Antonio Gramsci about where this came from, the long march through the institutions. That might take more time than you want to hear. What to do about it? It's funny. I give a lot of talks, and I inevitably get asked by somebody, surely this is a pendulum, and this craziness, it'll swing back. And I said, well, some pendulums are wrecking balls. And I've long been inclined to think this pendulum is a wrecking ball. I don't think you can save Yale or Harvard. I really don't. I think the cancer is too deeply embedded. You'd kill the patient. If they can be saved, it's, like I said earlier, a multi-generational effort.
Turn it into low-income housing?
That's a higher use. But, the last couple of months have given me a little bit of hope, because as I mentioned earlier, I don't have to tell everybody anymore what DEI is. They actually know now, and most people seem to understand it's kind of a bad thing, even though the words say nice things.
Mm-hmm.
But always remember, from the progressive end, whatever the words are, they in reality, they mean the opposite. So.
That's true. I was reading I'm trying to see if I can find it quickly on the run here. There was an Australian author, Helen Dale, and I don't think I can find the piece quickly enough. But she's a medievalist, I gather, and she was saying that this is not the first time this stuff has happened. She was giving a medieval example, and again involving the church and how it was swayed. And she's bringing up various monarchs and how they dealt with when the church diverged from, took on its own way. At one point, she said, I think it's 16th century England, the church was the single largest landholder, more than the royalty, and they were wealthier than the royalty. So there was this, pitting of forces, and whichever king it was at the time, I don't think it was Henry VIII, but predecessors, they put on, and then Henry VIII obviously took down the Catholic Church, but there are ways and levers of putting pressure and maneuvers on these institutions, and they will go around. And the example I think she used for today was basically, all these kind of little cutouts, carve-outs, sinecures, special funding, this and that the universities, basically live on. It's not just their endowment, it's not just their tuition, but they have, their massive research groups, and a lot of it's totally non-essential. I'm sure you could, it's not just, Buckley's, he'd rather be ruled by the first, letters in the phone book than the faculty at Harvard. But a lot of the stuff that comes out is, minuscule and mediocre variants of gibberish, as it were, as we've seen from Claudine Gay's actual treatise and whatnot, PhD thesis. A lot of this stuff is just, obviously it's literally recycled in this case, but a lot of it's just kind of theoretically recycled, and there's really no great basis for it to begin with. How much of that could we do without? And as we learn to tighten our belts, can we? Herb Stein said that which cannot continue doesn't. have we reached that point? And to quote Hemingway, this bankruptcy is, what is it, gradual, and then all of a sudden, I forget how it goes.
It happens gradually, then all of a sudden. One of his best quote ever, I think.
Thank you. Actually, I got to take that back. That is not actually Ernest Hemingway. That is my quote. I came up with it.
Okay.
Hey, I don't know. Since plagiary, the other quote is from, what is it, Carl Reiner? Don't shade your eyes, plagiarize.
Well, you hit on something that coincidentally I'm having dinner later with a trustee of a major university, and one of the things I want to discuss with them is the concept of tenure, which in a perfect world would go away entirely, but perhaps in the interim, another step in the right direction is to redefine how one gets tenure. Right now, you get tenure by publishing lots of nonsense. And all these academic pieces that are written by PhD candidates, then postdocs, and then associate professors, et cetera, all in this game to get tenure. These papers are read by effectively no one. I understand. I heard this the other day. The vast majority may get read by the advisor in charge of it, but that's about it. So they go into this just chasm, and a lot of them are also DEI nonsense at this point too, right? An incredible number of them are bending the knee to DEI and trying to find racism in the pattern of migration of animals in Africa or something. Completely unrelated things is my point. So why not have tenure for the really good teachers? The ones, you remember from Yale and I remember from Yale, but we all remember from our college experiences, the course you just had to take because the guy was such a dynamic lecturer, the ones who packed him in, the Vincent Scullys. Why not look at who the really popular teachers are who are motivating students and give those tenure rather than ones that spit out these ridiculous papers that on obscure subjects that nobody reads. So that's my grand idea.
Well, I'm gonna push back slightly and just apply. We actually have some very hugely successful meritocratic institutions. Are you aware of what are the prime meritocracies in the United States?
What are the what meritocracies?
The prime meritocracies, successful meritocratic institutions in the U.S. I have a couple that come to mind. I'm just wondering if I can mind.
What's left? You tell me.
Okay, I'll tell you. Ready? Fortunately, you're sitting down. The NBA, the NFL, baseball, hockey, you name it. Basically, sports. They don't care about diversity. They don't have any. The Celtics, for last I saw, they field a team based on who it is, how tall you are, how good you can shoot, and just even being 7 feet doesn't put you on that team. They had Moses Brown, and 7'1", but he couldn't make the team. You have to be tall and skilled, and they don't really care whether you're Slovenian or Fastvenian or whatever. As long as you can play the game. And so we have a meritocracy. So I would kind of push back on the tenure concept because there are no tenured basketball players. There are some guys who hang around the league, 20 years if they can. Like LeBron's going to make his 20th All-Star game in a row, which is unthinkable. I mean, making a couple is amazing. 20 in a row, and I think 20 starting bids, nods in a row. Incredible. And maybe he can play till he's 60, whatever, but he's not going to get tenure. He doesn't deserve tenure because nobody wants to watch him at 60. Nobody wants to watch Michael Jordan at 65. Maybe somebody does, but not in an NBA game. And so we have this, we actually have a parallel institution that rewards actual contributions. And obviously this mimicked in the business world to an extent before, kind of the Larry Finks would want to change that. But there's only a certain amount of ballast you can take on any institution. The universities have that luxury of being spoiled children because we keep feeding them. So we have to figure a way to stop feeding them, and then they have to stop, just having these tenured positions and bloat and so forth. You can't get rid of people. So I think it's I would just have it be on the meritocratic system and let everyone be free agents and they go where they are. And there's got to be some, additional, I can't think of the word, but, concretization or an accretion of professorship, because a lot of it's duplicated. If you could have had Vincent Scully, happens to be at Yale, but you could listen to his lecture through Zoom, whatever, and be someplace else, all to the good. I think you could do a lot more with kind of the YouTubeization of courses and fragmenting them and letting people access the knowledge they need to on a as needed basis, as per Peter Thiel and whatnot, and maybe turn Yale and Harvard into very gorgeous condos.
So if you're asking me if we should get rid of tenure, I'm entirely on your side. I was merely suggesting an interim step that might go down a little easier.
I wasn't trying to be combative with you.
But I'm entirely on your side. I think it's a ridiculous concept. The idea was, obviously so you had academic freedom to, sort of research what you want, say what you want, do what you want. But as a matter of principle, right now, if you're conservative, you're not getting tenure anyway. So there really isn't this freedom of expression built into the system anymore. And by the way, I come from New York, and so do you. I don't know how many states this is true of, but I know it's true of New York. In public schools, teachers, you could be a kindergarten teacher, they get tenure automatically, regardless of performance, after 2 years. So they get complete job security for life after 2 years. It's an insane system. It's almost impossible to fire them. It costs the legal process they have to go through to fire a teacher costs about $200,000. So if they're really awful, and by really awful I mean like sexual predators or something, they kind of move them into what's called a rubber room, and they just sit there.
The irony is that the newspapers went all nuts on Bernard Law and the Catholic Church. It was endless, and I think they managed to take the Catholic Church down. I don't know about fatally, but certainly attendance is down hugely. But always it's been the case, from what I understand, that the larger number of pedophilic male individuals are in the public schools versus the churches. Maybe the same proportion, but they're certainly larger numbers. And but the finger never gets pointed in that direction. You hear almost nothing about predatory teachers. Obviously, it came out a little bit Horace Mann, ironically enough, but a lot of it happens in elementary school level, and a lot of in middle school one. It's not to say all. I don't want to bring a broad brush, but a lot of the male younger student teachers have similar proportionality of problems as did the priesthood. And the Boston Globe and the New York Times will never, ever, ever cover that. These things only get to be pointed in a certain direction.
Well, you may recall that the former head of admissions at Yale, Inky Clark, who was somewhat of a radical back in the late 60s, left Yale and went to Horace Mann and became a serial predator on young boys there before he committed suicide.
I didn't know he committed suicide. I knew Inslee Clark. My brother was a big fan of his. My older brother went into he was like urban studies and this and that. And that was Inky's deal. I liked him a lot. We rehash a lot of this. There's a group, a private Facebook group called Processing Horace Mann, and people are doing that, I guess, mentally, whatever. I think it's quieted down. I don't know if I'm still part of the group or not. I must have been ugly back then because nobody came towards me at all in any untoward manner. I do think there were homosexual teachers. There was an all-boys school at the time, and into young men. Men was like from 7th grade till 12th grade. But the teachers involved, there were certain of them that about whom these allegations were made. But in every single case, they were made posthumously. So we never have I still, hew to this, innocent till proven guilty, unlike, the CRT. So I kind of feel as if it's a loss that the professors were not able to be kind of brought to bear, the ones in I can't remember his name, Amos's book. There are a couple that were still alive and admitted to engaging, but they weren't like serial predators. There's Tek Young Lin, who apparently had an affair or two with various students sequentially. Richard Berman was, I think, the worst one, and he was kind of this Svengali type. He shaved his head way before it was fashionable and had wore sunglasses indoors and these kind of tight suits, little skinny ties. And he had, every year there was at least one or two Berman light students who just like absorbed his whole persona and view. They almost looked like Men in Black or the guy in the Matrix, Mr. Smith. Anyway, strange times. It's funny. I don't know how to get away from this. I mean, my wife is a classicist and studies the Romans and Greeks, and they have their Socrates and Plato's, but they also have like a lot of funky stuff too. So is it all part of the human experiment? I don't know how to police all this stuff perfectly.
We had a predator at Milton Academy when I was there, and I wasn't aware of it. Didn't take his class, but he's in jail now. Yeah. So sometimes it doesn't have to wait till they're dead.
Yeah, I got one of my classmates hugely ticked off at me. He's a successful man and homosexual, and I said, just kind of idea balloon. I said, we were an all boys school then. It's not now. It's half and half. But pretty much all men were teachers. And I said, would it have been a benefit at the time to have queried, no pun intended, about the teachers' proclivities? He said, not all homosexuals are predators. I'm like, dude, I totally get that. But every predator was a homosexual. So it's kind of one of these little syllogisms that come up. It's like, if there's another Muslim terrorist attack, it doesn't mean I hate all Muslims, but should you be a little bit more cautious in those situations? Anyway, he disbanded and whatever, threw a few epithets my way. But it's an interesting question. How you screen for these things and whether you should.
Well, predators are going to go where there's prey, right? That's why you find them in ice cream trucks.
All right. So I'm wondering if you have any last thoughts, or if you want to touch on any concepts about which we should be, aware as this situation unfolds in our college campuses and high school campuses and so forth.
Well, so tying into my new book, All the Lovely People, I just want everyone to start doing what Bill Ackman has just started to do now, which is call out, in his case, call out the individual board members of the Harvard Corporation by name. Ken Chenault and Penny Pritzker. These are the people that bear responsibility for the destruction of their institutions. I mean, it happened before they came, but they're the ones watching it accelerate on their watch. But this applies to every institution. The progressive woke left has taken over every institution in America virtually. And the boards themselves are a mix. They're not necessarily stocked with people who believe all this stuff, but they go along with it because they're too afraid to raise their hands. They're too afraid, if you're on a prep school board or something, to say anything because your daughter might not get the right recommendation to Harvard or something like that, right? I want to encourage everybody to hold these boards' feet to the fire, and also to cease this ridiculous worship of in particular Ivy League institutions, because they are not. The Yale that you and I went to does not exist. It was a great place. I had a fantastic experience there.
I know.
I dreamed my kids would go there. And it's not that place anymore. It bears no resemblance to it. Physically, it's more beautiful than ever. It's way prettier. The campus is gorgeous now. Not that it wasn't then, but so much money has flowed through the place. But they are rotten to the core. And we have to stop our societal worship of these places. And I think that's starting to happen.
All right. Well, lovely. Thank you so much. I'm going to post your book up again, and I'm going to give a final plug for myself because I can. Let's see. Book. Here it is. So people should go out and buy Campusland. You can get it on this thing called Amazon. And it's a great read. And I owe you a review to be put up there. But that's coming. And if you want us to help support my podcast, you can buy this book. It's called Overturning Zika, the Pandemic That Never Was, although everyone stipulated it was a pandemic, or at least a PHEIC, a public health emergency of international concern, very prosaic. And it disappeared. And you mentioned the Emperor's New Clothes earlier. It's a funny thing within the institutions of infectious disease, tropical medicine, medicine in general, pediatrics, neonatology. Everyone is assuming Zika caused microcephaly. You look at the literature, the CDC, WHO, everybody stipulates this, but it never, ever occurred, if at all, after the very first year in 2015, even before the 2016 outbreak. By the time 2016 came around, we donated $1 billion through Congress to this cause, which wasn't really happening in the US, had already disappeared, even in the ground zero of the original formulation in Northeast Brazil. So I think Zika is a real virus, and I think microcephaly is a real but very rare congenital abnormality. It just so happens that one doesn't cause the other. And I was just stunned in 2019 when I started, before COVID, when I started writing about this, to find out that nobody on Earth was really even asking this question, like, is it possible that they got the hypothesis wrong? And science is based on hypothesis, test, lather, rinse, repeat kind of thing. And you're supposed to have to keep always testing your theories because, they're only theories otherwise. Anyway, that's it has really nothing to do with your book per se, but aside from the fact that people should read them both. And I'll catch up to you, but probably not. Anyway, thank you, Scott, for being on. Any last words?
No, all good here. Thank you for having me.
Lovely. Have a great